Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast with your host, Andrew Keel. This is the podcast where you can get the education you need to invest 100% passively in the highly profitable niche of mobile home parks.
Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. This is your host, Andrew Keel, and today we have an amazing guest in Mr. Glenn Esterson, the MHP expert. But before we dive in, I want to ask a real quick favor. Would you mind please taking an extra 30 seconds and heading over to iTunes to rate this podcast with 5 stars? This helps us get more listeners, and it means the absolute world to me. So thanks for making my day with that review of the show. All right, let's dive in. Glenn is passionate about the mobile home park space. He has been a commercial real estate broker since 2001 and bought his first manufactured home community in 2004. He has sold hundreds of mobile home parks nationwide and continues to be one of the industry's most active brokers. He is also the author of the Mobile Home Park Manifesto, a book on ethical and profitable investing in non-institutional grade land lease communities. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Maybe you can start out by telling our listeners a little about your story and how you got into manufactured housing.
Sure. So, I mean, right now we're nearing our 1,000th park for that we've sold. It's friggin' nuts.
Wow.
You know, that's a lot. We did 100 parks. You know, I think we've done 86 parks this year so far. You know,
wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. A lot of them are portfolios and stuff like that. But you know, I got into this world very reluctantly because no one else would have me. You know, 20 years ago. You know, I wanted to do like everybody else, you know, sell apartments and stuff like that. I was kind of down on my luck way back when. And my dad's friend showed me how he was operating some apartment buildings, you know, class F, you know, crap down in, you know, Miami. That was not the prettiest stuff. And, you know, but I loved it. This guy was so cool and he was making money and showing me how he was helping these tenants get, you know, a solid foundation in life. And, you know, his rents were the cheapest in Miami and all that kind of stuff. And I really dug it. After a year or so of working with him just loosely, he said, go get your license and let's start making you some money. So I went and got my license and started renting, you know, apartments for him and getting, you know, a month's rent every time I rented a unit for him. And I was renting 2 or 3 units a day at 25 years old. Before I knew it, I was making some decent money. You know, I just had a baby and stuff like that, you know, and it was meaningful, very meaningful to me. And after a little while with him, he said, hey, why don't you sell this building? Why don't you sell this building? It took me like 5 seconds to sell these buildings, you know, and, you know, I went through the learning curve and I said, oh, this is pretty awesome. A few years after doing that, I had some money in my pocket finally. And I said, I'm out of here. I'm retiring. And I hung my hat up. You know, I had not much money. It was just, you know, something very little money, big money to me at the time. And I went and bought a farm, which was my passion for most of my life, was being a farmer. And so I bought a farm in North Carolina and full throttled it there, trying to make a living being a farmer. And after about a decade, I realized my best year was like 25, 30 grand. And so it wasn't doing me so well. Luckily, the one thing that kept me surviving was I took that money I made in Miami and I bought a small little park in Eastern Tennessee, about, you know, 30, 40 minutes from my farm. It was just a small park, 35, 40 units. And it was all park-owned homes. And it was, you know, good old fashioned, bottom level type of stuff there. It was, you know, I had, you know, hookers and meth heads and, you know, all sorts of everything you don't want in your park. And nobody told me nothing about this stuff back then. There was not a single resource out there, you know, back then, and at least that I could find. You know, I didn't even have internet yet at my farm, you know, so it was, you know, it was all learning curve for me. And I just jumped in, got my butt kicked in it for a couple of years, had, you know, a lot of rough times, a lot of crazy stories. I mean, like there was a TV show out for a while that, you know, kind of emphasized the worst of parks. Well, my park was worse than that, you know. And it was, you know, police officers there, daily fights in the courtyards and things like that. Eventually I said, enough's enough. How do I turn this thing? And I found this really cool guy. His name was also Glenn. He was about 85 years old, and he just happened to have been the only old timer out there that knew how to turn a park. And he said, oh, you got to sell off the homes or give away the homes, and you got to do X, Y, and Z. And I said, you're crazy. You know, I'm not doing that. And finally during the 2009, kind of, 2009, 2010, I said, okay, I can't have it anymore. I got to do something about it. And called the guy back up. He came and helped me. And within a year, I had the whole park turned and said, oh, this makes sense now. And a few years later, I sold it. And during that 2013 era, I said, I think I got something here. I think I'm going to, broker these deals, and moved off the farm and moved to Atlanta and got lucky with Marcus and Millichap. They were willing to hire me and give me a shot because, I told them a good story, I guess. And finally, for the first time in my life, I started feeling like, oh, wow, I'm a grown up now and I'm doing a big boy job and I'm making some real money. And it took a couple of years to, get to the ground. But, here we are today. And it was a story of reluctance getting into it. But now I just love this stuff, I speak all over the place about this industry, and I've helped thousands of people, and my book has sold thousands and thousands of copies. It's it's all about the little guy, the institutions, they know what they're doing, we're not trying to help the institutions any more than necessary right now. I'm trying to help guys that are first coming into this business who don't have a solid ground but have a couple of bucks and want to make a difference in life for themselves, and without jamming rent growth down, 85-year-old ladies, kind of budget, because that's just not going to work. And so we really emphasize, how to increase profits without hurting your poor tenants, because, we've seen a lot of rent growth the last 5 years, and some of it's totally reasonable and some of it is almost a little unfair. And, the way that me and my team emphasize upside, it's all about, fill your vacant homes first, then fill your vacant lots, then go for the expansion. Keep your legacy tenants pretty flat. Maybe you grow them at 3%, but your new tenants, you can go and get, full market rent on. And yeah, your upside takes a little bit longer, but it's a more stable amount of income that you're generating that way without hurting the feelings and ending up in the press and all that kind of stuff when you go for that $200 rent increase upon close because you overstated the expectations with your investors who are giving you your money to buy the deal about hitting a 10% return. So, I don't like that. I was the poorest guy on the block forever, And so, I remember what a $50 rent bump felt like to me. It was murderous almost, for me back in the day. And times ain't any easier for people today. If you're poor, it's really, really hard out there, And, there's something that you have to be cognizant of about that. And, if you're dealing with a highfalutin park, then fine. But, for most people listening to me speak are usually starting at the bottom and working their way up, and the people in their parks are even, on a lower level, and so your tenants are your most important possession at a park. Without them, you don't make money, so you better take care of them. And that's kind of how I emphasize what I do. And I think part of the reason why I've been so successful in this industry.
That's awesome, Glenn. And yeah, that's a great perspective coming at it from that angle, because there's a ton of value add to be had with those vacant lots. Literally, you drive through mobile home parks nowadays, and it's very common that a lot of these mom and pops are just leaving meat on the bone. They're just leaving these vacant lots. And, it's a little more elbow grease, right, to go in there and fill those lots, but the value's there. It's like
one lot is going to rent for $400. Okay.
Yeah.
One rent bump, even if you're kind of an aggressive rent pusher, what are you going to get? $50? Okay. Yeah. You're going to get it across however many people, but that's 8 people to pay one lot, right? So if you rent one lot at 400, that's like you didn't have to raise rents on 8 people, for that $50. And it's more sticky income, and that's really what you want to do. And it is a little scarier, it is a little harder, it is a little longer, but it's a better process in the end, and as long as you're vetting your tenants well, your legacy tenants are going to feel good about the new tenants coming in. They're going to see you kind of stamp where you're trying to go with everybody. And maybe it takes 10 years to get that legacy tenant up to market rent, but that's okay. That's okay. As long as you've set expectations with your investors and you're not a pump and dump type of operator, that to me is the more sustainable way to grow this industry and for us to alleviate some of the regulations that we just see kind of coming down the pipeline that might get forced down our throats if we keep being aggressive as we have in the last few years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think rent increases definitely hold their place also. I
Of
think
course.
a lot of these parks have not had rent increased in 10 plus years. So I
Yeah.
think there's a time and a place for everything. But yeah, making those improvements to make the property better,
Yeah.
is
Put
key.
your
And I know
improvements in up front. Put them in up front. Raise your money
exactly.
up front for the roads, for the landscape, for the septics that need to get repaired. Put that in the front. Let your tenants see that you're
Yeah,
putting in real money, and then go hit them up for a 3 or 5% rent increase on your legacies. And again, feel free to get full rental market value out of your new tenants that are coming in. If the market's $600 and your tenants are only at $300, feel free to get $600 on your new tenants. But the grandma in number two who's on Medicare, or is getting a small check and all that kind of stuff every month, she can't handle a $200 rent increase. She can't handle that $200 rent increase even if you break it up over 4 years. Okay, so you have to be cognizant of that. At least in my world. Now I'm kind of a bleeding heart, so I might look at things a little differently. But to me, there's a way for everybody to accomplish their financial goals without it just being stuffing it down the poor guy's throat. In my
for
world. I mean,
sure.
other
No,
people disagree with me, and that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
We all are allowed our own philosophies about this, but for me, that's how I felt better. When I bought my park, my rents were $75. No shit,
Wow.
$75.
$75 a month.
And
Wow.
my homes were renting for $250. Okay, so
Jeez.
like I'm not just talking out of my butt. I'm being serious about this. By the time I sold my park 15 years later, my rents were a measly $200. Okay, and
Mm.
so I'm very cognizant of pushing rents, because I know you can still be profitable. Do the infill, do the upsides, in a more productive way. Spend your money up front. Let the tenants know what you're doing, and be transparent with them. Be like, hey, look, I'm going to be taking my rents up to here over X amount of years, depending on your ability to be a good tenant and getting this park where it needs to be. I'm putting in all this money. This is what I'm doing. Here's all the competitors around me, and here's what they're currently charging. You're not going to necessarily get a better deal by going over there because they're going to get you for new rent as well as a new tenant. So let's work together and let's come up with a plan. And if you live to your word, I'll live to my word. And that seemed to resonate with my tenants once I got my park turned.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me, Glenn, what do you think is the toughest hurdle for most operators in the mobile home park business?
The investor expectations, they get glued to this idea of other people's money, you know, and it's almost like a drug to them, and they set expectations probably too ambitiously with these investors, and they say, oh, we're going to hit a 20% 5-year IRR or whatever number they're trying to hit, but the only way to really do that is by jamming rent growth, and I think that becomes an obstacle. Whereas if you had set different expectations with your investor base, you probably could have been a bit, you probably could have taken a little bit longer time to do it and probably done it without landing in the newspapers about, John Doe's, raising rents at his park by, 200%, without improvements. That's like the worst press. You really don't want it. It ends up on the TV sometimes, things like that. So that, to me, that's one of the biggest hurdles, but that's capitalism. It's okay, but the next one I really think is around, tenant vetting, who you're letting move into your park. One bad tenant, it could be like a crack epidemic. You could have all perfectly good people in your park. You let one bad tenant in, before you know it, they're all on drugs and they're all doing bad stuff and they're revolting. I've lived through it. I know how it is. You see that big wad of cash in somebody's hand and you're like, man, I could really use some extra cash right now. I need this, especially as a mom and pop. I need this revenue. And you make a poor judgment about a tenant and it ruins your tenant base. And then you spend the next, 3, 6, 12 months getting this guy out of your park and then cleaning up all of the damage that he or she, caused at the park. And on that note, we got pretty clear about how important tenant vetting is. We've seen, especially in small towns, you'll see people get evicted and just kind of like shuffle through all the parks, like, oh, hey, this guy, he was here and now he's here and now he's there and now he's going there. And one of my friends, a guy named Tom, he had an idea. He was an eviction attorney, and he's like, I think there's a solution here to this thing. And he convinced me to invest with him. And now we have a great product out there called Rent Butter. It's one of the best tenant verification systems out there, and it's moving along nicely. So tenant vetting, I think, is an extremely critical part of your operational standpoint. Over promising your investors, is really just, you're starting off on the wrong foot when you do that. So those two things together, if you solve that issue, in my opinion, the rest of your operational stands will usually go pretty well. I mean, obviously getting the right employees, putting the right people, in the right seat on the right bus to help drive your machine, is critically important. But, a good operator usually has pretty intelligent people around them to put the right managers in the right spots and the right regional managers, controlling the right divisions and things like that.
Awesome. Tell us, as a broker, what things have you seen operators overlook and not account for in their pro formas?
Depends which broker. I mean, there's some really good brokers out there. I mean, some of my competition, they do a bang up job. They really do. We're meticulous. Our thing on underwriting is world-class underwriting. Okay. We want to make sure it's bulletproof. Okay. So we tie everything back as much as we can, but sometimes these mom and pops don't have bank statements and stuff like that, or if they do, it's commingled. And then you have brokers that just kind of make guesses and the logic isn't there, and they try to underwrite to, hey, look, it's a 7 cap, but not really telling you it's a 20% expense ratio, and things like that. I think it's really lack of experience for a lot of the brokers that don't underwrite correctly. Whereas us, we are consistently one of the lowest cap rate brokers out there. Like we get told all the time we're easy about our cap rates. We just sold a park in PA, a fully stable park in PA for a 3.3 cap, but that's really what it comes out to on that deal. Whereas some other brokers could have fudged it to make it look like a 5 cap. But the buyers are smart nowadays, and they're going to dig in and they're going to argue with you about your pricing and about your logic and method with your underwriting. We do a lot of deals sub 4 cap. We just closed one in Wisconsin. It was like a 3.6 cap, also on a stabilized deal. And that number to most people sounds insane. But when you hear the story and you understand why today it's a 3.6 cap and why tomorrow, it will be a 6 cap, then you can start seeing how how the motions play out. But without having a defendable story and without having real understanding of all the pulleys and levers that are in that deal to make this work and that work, and a lot of that has to deal with your debt, if I'm a new broker, I'm trying to target something that's attractive for a buyer to call me just so I can get somebody on the hook and then deal with a retrade later on or something like that. We set expectations pretty strongly with our sellers. We always price, not always, but 95% of the time, always price our deals, and we set the expectation.
Well, let me ask you this, Glenn. Let me ask you this. So what would be something that maybe gets overlooked in the underwriting? That's
CapEx
common.
all the time. CapEx is always overlooked.
Just like general park improvements, park improvements, that kind of stuff. Okay.
Park improvements, deferred maintenance, landscape, stuff like that is always pretending like, oh no, it's fine. Your roads are great. You never need to worry about them. Oh no, the trees are fine. You don't need to deal with them. That's always something we see, people not account for in their pricing. The debt equation is a huge factor. And most of the time, the brokers we're just going to throw a number out there without getting a true debt quote on this deal. And that's going to totally, manipulate your numbers by not having a proper debt quote that's achievable, because the debt is the basis of your return. I mean, it's pretty straightforward,
Yeah, definitely.
And so, we go through all those processes to make sure. Management's often one, oh, well, this guy's managing himself, so we don't need a management fee, thrown in here. Yeah, but that's why you're at a 15% expense ratio, and things like that, So we normalize a mom and pop's P&L, because their P&L might just show taxes, insurance, and R&M. Okay. And they might, maybe there's utilities if they're, utilities there, but oftentimes with well and septic, they just pretend like that's not an expense that exists. A lot of brokers do that too, and so we normalize all that and add an expense in where it's missing. And if the insurance is wicked low, we'll take it up to where it needs to be. If taxes we know are going to reset, we take them up. We call the municipalities, we figure out all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of brokers don't do that. My old mentor, a guy named Mike Pisano, he used to call that, lazy broker, like the lazy brokerage. They just don't sit there and think through how the buyer is actually going to operate. And he drove that into me when, I was younger about, just if you have impeccable underwriting, you'll do a lot of deals. And,
for sure. Let me ask you this though, real quick. What would you say? Because I'm going to circle back. You said the expense ratios a couple times. What are some common expense ratios that you're seeing and you're underwriting deals at?
They typically are, when you remove water and sewer out of the equation, okay? Because, water and sewer are either going to be direct billed, or they're going to be billed back, or they're going to be included, or it's just going to be a private utility system. So you have to understand kind of how these things play. But typically, when you remove water and sewer, revenue and expense out of the equation, by the time you fully stabilize the park and got it up to full market rents and full market occupancy, I like to see that expense ratio somewhere around 30%, 30 to 35%, maybe, depending on what market you're in. Like New York, it's going to be higher because your taxes are wicked. Same in California, But in most markets, that 30-40 rule is going to apply. Okay. And that's the mythology that's been taught for years, and it's actually true. And you want to really pay attention to that. Your day one stuff, it might not necessarily be reasonable. Like today, yesterday I underwrote a deal 68% expense ratio. It is what it is. That's a real number for this guy. But by the time you get the rents where they need to be, and you fix the occupancy and you fix the efficiencies, that pro forma with the water and sewer removed out should land around 30%. And guess what? It does. It lands at 32% on that deal. And that's kind of what we're looking for. I have personally never taken a park out below 30% expense ratio because it's never closed, ever, ever, so for me, we just don't do it. We're doing a deal right now in Georgia, really nice deal. Sold it a few times. This guy's operating truly professionally from California at a 22% expense ratio. I know for a fact that that's a real number for this guy. And I know the next guy's going to operate around there too, but guess what? I'm kind of handcuffed to my 30% rule. So we have to do that there. Now I'll take the cap rate down low, very low, to offset that, but we'll have a discussion, with the buyers about why it's this way and how it's, and how it's working and things like that.
Okay. So Glenn, as the MHP expert, what would you say are the most important things passive investors, we're talking LPs here, what are the most important things passive investors need to look out for when investing into mobile home parks?
Oh, that's a good question. I love the LP side. I think it's the smartest side. I live off this rule I made up called time value headache. And there is just nothing better than being an LP. In my opinion, you get all the passive depreciation. You get to sit here and yell at your GPs about them not performing. You don't have to do any of the lift. You just have to sit there and cough up, some money, some, 20 grand, 100 grand, 250, whatever it might be to be, in that seat. But you get, no headache out of it. Okay, you might lose your money if you pick the wrong operator. To me, that's a smart investment. Okay, I'm an LP in a bazillion things, not in MH, but in plenty of other businesses, because it allows me to get the income without having to do the work, essentially. And I go out and spend my time doing the work that I do. So what I look for in an LP, as an LP in my operator is, hey, do I get along with you? Okay. Are you returning my calls? Are you sending me reports? Okay. Are you really being transparent with me, or are you just feeding me the fluff? Because I don't, I don't want the hopeful dreamer stuff. I want the real deal. Like you're pitching, this is going to be a 5X, but is it really going to be a 5X, or is it going to be more like a 1.5X when it's all said and done? I want to know what I'm getting into. If I was an MH investor, I would be very, very cautious about who I'm giving my money to. There's a lot of new groups coming in promising, some big stuff, and they haven't been through a down cycle yet. Okay. And we're pretty frothy out there right now. And like we started off the conversation, they're setting expectations with their investors that are pretty high. And I would be cautious of that. And I'd be looking at some of the groups that have been around for a hot minute, that have a pretty large portfolio, that seems to be on the right track. But I'd be okay with just getting a 15%, return on the deal, and getting a 6 pref or something like that, which I know sounds low to some people. But for guys like me, hey, if I trust you, if I like you, and you have performance track record, I'm totally fine with the 6% return on my money and maybe a 15%, back end. Okay. Like, to me, that's time value headache right there. Right. Now, if it's a new guy and he's like, oh, I'm going to give you 20% and I'm going to give you a 9% pref, I'm going to sit there and scratch my head a little bit like, he's a nice kid, but, I think I'm taking on too much risk here. So, I kind of bounce, I'd be bouncing back and forth through there. And some of these operators out there that I know that I talk to every day, they're amazing, great operators. And, oddly, those are the guys that typically don't need to raise too much money. The money's just always coming to them, right? And some of them pay decent, obviously, but most of them are going to be on that lower range that I was telling you about. But you can probably rest easier at night knowing that your money's in good hands. There's a couple of groups that are brand new, and right now they're on fire. They're doing great. Like, wow, impressive stuff. You're going to make some real money. But again, I'm cautious because they haven't been through a down cycle. They haven't hit a real hurdle. They haven't sit there and said, "Uh-oh, all the septics are bad. Uh-oh, the lagoon that we just bought, there's no way to convert it over to the city." And they haven't handled a really hard, issue yet. And as an investor, I want to see my GPs handle a hard issue, overcome it, and then all of a sudden, if my trust value in them was an 8, now it's all of a sudden, a 9 or a 10 because they were able to overcome that objection. So, that's kind of me. I wouldn't say it's for everybody, but for me, like 5, 6, 7% returns don't scare me. To me, that seems like safe money.
Yeah, no, I think that's some great advice for the listeners. Glenn, tell us, what does the perfect mobile home park look like in your eyes and why?
Like the one I just sold, that one up in PA, it was a beautiful deal. It's called Shadowstone Village. It's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. 188 spaces, all retirement, all double wide, all direct build utilities, beautiful homes, beautiful streets, zero pain on that deal. Okay. And the rents, they will grow over time slowly. If I'm a 20-year investor, I'm making a pile of money on that deal by the time I'm ready to exit again. And I'm having the easiest time imaginable because it's really like a cash flow mailbox money type of thing at that point. And yes, I'm coming into it at a 3.3 cap, not the greatest, still better than my Amex high yield savings, right? So, and that's, to me, is fine, especially if I'm investing out of my SEP account and putting my money into a deal like that that's now growing tax free and my returns coming in, and in 10, 15, 20 years, I have a beautiful, beautiful park. That park sold for, 18.5 million plus or minus, and 100,000 a lot. If that's what it is today, I can't even imagine what that's going to be, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm going to look like a genius, then, because I beat out the market today. That seemed like I was a little crazy to do so, but I never have, headaches. I never have pain points, and this thing grows and is reliable. To me, that's how I would invest. These value add things that I've seen you do, and you've done very successful with them, that I just don't got the stomach for it. I went through that before, and it was just, for me, it was all a kick in the nuts. And when I got to the finish line, my paycheck was a little softer than I wish it was, and, the older I get and the more I have to spend my time in a bazillion, situations, I just want no headache and some return. I'm not going for home runs in year 1, 2, or 3 ever anymore. And if I am, I'm putting it into a different world where my expectations were set that, like, you might lose all your money today, but maybe you're on some massive thing that's going to do a 10x or something like that. And that's, where I'm at with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe we can talk about the future a little bit. What
Sure.
do you think the future of mobile home parks looks like? Where do you see the economy going with the inflation we're experiencing currently?
Sure. So cash flow in real estate's the best hedge against inflation, period. Okay. So from that standpoint, mobile home parks are really well situated. As we saw during the Great Recession, as we saw during the COVID mishap, and as what we're now peering into this high inflation kind of environment, mobile homes are still the best situated to not be too affected, right? So we have, the lowest cost basis for living anywhere. Okay, so if everyone always needs a place to live, we're that bottom rung. Okay, it doesn't get cheaper than this. Okay, so things will cycle down to us, improve our tenant base. Actually, if we go through a hard thing like what we saw in the Great Recession, okay, and what we've been seeing during the COVID pandemic, the rents are already there's so much delta between a lot rent and a 2-bedroom apartment rent that, there used to be more delta. Now there's about a 50% delta. Okay. So there's still a lot of room to go up, even if it goes up to 70%, okay, which is a massive amount of rent growth, for you as an operator. You're still the cheapest place to live, period. So, and now that homes are being able to be financed much easier than ever before, and they're not these atrocious interest rates like they were a few years ago, I think we're well positioned to still be the best investment vehicle in real estate for any of the major verticals, moving forward, even if we hit some really tough times ahead, which we very well might. I mean, there's a lot of people out there saying, hey, these last couple, issues we had, those were just precursors to a bigger reset that's coming. I'm not saying I buy into it, okay, but this is some of the stuff that's out there. And even in those events, I think MH will be very resilient. And the fundamental basis that 20 years ago I learned in Miami that my dad's friend taught me was you will always need a place to live will remain true forever and ever. And if you're buying well-located real estate, just location still remains the number one rule of real estate. So if you get too far out and you take a low quality deal and you didn't vet your tenants, yeah, you're gonna have problems. You're gonna have problems, period. Especially if you overpaid on that thing and you have too much debt and all that kind of stuff. But if you keep yourself fairly low levered and you keep yourself, in a secondary or primary city, and you keep yourself positioned well with your tenant vetting, I don't see why, even in the worst of economies, that you're still not making more money than the next guy on your investment.
Yeah, I think the best argument I heard recently from an economist called John Malden, he said that COVID.
I love Malden. I love Malden. I read all of this stuff. He's great.
Yeah, he's wonderful. So he had an interesting email that he sent out where he said that COVID kind of expedited this artificial intelligence development and creation, and that who's going to get hurt the most, what jobs are going to be done away with in the beginning when we onboard AI into our day-to-day lives. It's going to be the service jobs, right? And I think we're already seeing that, right? Like you go to McDonald's, you try to order a burger, you're doing it on a self-help kiosk, right? Same thing at Walmart, same thing at other places. So
robotics and AI are going to change the future for us. I mean, they for better or worse, you're going to have to learn how to accommodate that. And if you're a $60,000 employee, making, doing some service industry that really can be replicated, by a robot, I would be kind of cautious about,
But isn't that the tenant base? Isn't that the mobile home park tenant base? Just playing devil's advocate?
Yes and no. Okay, so most of the tenant park tenants, or most of the mobile home park tenants, they're on a lower wage scale. Okay, they're making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year. Okay, and the robotics, they're pretty expensive right now, and so they're more targeting the things that are in that $50,000 to $100,000 employee to replace. Now, the kiosk at Walmart and the fast food server may be a little different story, but you can't really replace the nurse. I mean, eventually you will be able to replace the nurse at the hospital, I have a feeling. But for now, that's probably pretty safe. You're not going to really be able to replace the teacher. You're not going to really be able to replace some of these, $30,000, jobs, the police officers, the firemen, things like that. So, and even if that does get replaced, you still need a place to live. So you're going to have to, figure that part out. And that's where manufactured housing is still a safety net. I think the robotics industry is going to make a remarkable impact on us over the next 10 years. And if I was a service worker, I'd be looking at kind of upgrading my education and my skills to find something that is probably in that world tending to those robotics, or to something that won't be as affected by robotics. But hey, I'm just some dude, so I don't see the future. So that's
who knows what's going to happen. But yeah, that's an interesting perspective. All right. So tell us about like mobile home parks in the market right now. One of my mentors was telling me how we're at a 50-year high in terms of pricing. Like mobile home parks are, selling for top dollar right now. You've sold over 230. Is that 230 mobile home parks and 86 this year?
Well, the 230 is probably from 5 years ago. Okay. But this year alone, we've sold about 50 something transactions in about 86 parks or so. We're about to close
this year.
We have another 8 or 9 parks to close before the end of the year. That's like another 25 parks or something like that.
Wow.
So and our team's only 2 years old. So we had some ramp up time. But I'm probably around 450 parks plus or minus at this point.
Wow. I think I saw the 230 just on a website or something.
Yeah. Maybe that's an old number. I don't always update all my stuff.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's ever
Yeah.
changing. But tell me this, Glenn, what are buyers looking for right now when they're looking for mobile home parks, and what cap rates are most operators exiting at?
Still all over the place. I mean, cap rates to me, I know everybody loves to talk about cap rates, and I like to brag about cap rates when I do a low cap rate deal and stuff, but they're not very relevant in my opinion. What's more relevant is your cash on cash. And what's more relevant is, your ability to implement a business plan to achieve your pro forma. So what we're seeing on stable deals, okay, is, typically somewhere around, a fully stable deal in a fully nice market with no real upside left. Most of the time, if it's not a trophy asset, is going to be somewhere in that, call it 4.5 to 6 cap type of range, depending on the market you're in. Okay. But 4.5, again, that's a little egregious on a fully stabilized deal. And so you got to have some other primers there that make it, worth it. Okay. And you have to have a buyer that's got some needs, that black swan type of, model type of thing. The average buyer still, just like they were before, looking for, 20, 25%, returns. Okay. And, so that's just a piece of your debt. Okay. So you figure out what your debt is, you add some spread on there, and then, you engineer to that number. I would say if it's a community bank type of deal, we're probably looking at 7 to 8% cap rates. Okay. If it's a Fannie Mae type of deal, we're probably looking at, 6 caps plus or minus on most stabilized stuff. But when you add value add in, the cap rates just go out the door. They just go out the door. And, you just, like we just pitched the deal yesterday. It's a 1.5 cap. Okay. On a value add, but you're going to take it to a 22 cap. Okay. So is it really relevant that it's a 1.5 cap? No, it's not. Right. So good market, achievable upside, that's much more relevant. The GRM seems to be a very interesting metric that has moved substantially over the last many years. For instance, that Shadowstone deal that we just did was a 19.95 GRM, hands down the highest GRM I've ever sold. Whereas most of our GRMs historically have been in that 5 to 8 type of model. Okay. And over the last couple of years, they've creeped up. They're more or less around a 10 or 12 right now on most deals that we sell. But the higher quality deals seem to higher quality deals or lower occupancy deals, heavy value adds, that's really escalating the GRM. And that's an interesting, model to watch, climb right now. But
so when you say GRM, just because most listeners might not know what that is.
Yeah, gross rent multiplier. So you take the park makes $100,000 in revenue a year, not profit, revenue. Okay. And you sold that park for, $1 million, that would be a 10 GRM. Okay. And so the higher the GRM, the certainly the lower the cap rate's going to end up being. But that way, when I buy a lot of businesses, and businesses often are evaluated off of a gross revenue. Okay. Because their expenses might be different than my expenses. So we're looking off of the gross revenue. And that seems to have been a metric that for my whole 20 years in this business seems to hold true. It's, you can kind of look at that. And buyers, when they price things, they're always looking backwards, or they're trying to convince the seller and the broker that, hey, nothing in this area is sold for that number and your rents are blah, blah, blah. But as a broker, we're always looking forward. And if I know I got something in my hopper that, is an apples to apples type of transaction for what I'm about to propose and bring out, I'm probably going to relay that math a little bit, heavier, and then project a few months out, because by the time we close, it can take 3 to 6 months to close the deal. By the time we close, the market has already moved, and I don't want my owner to feel like sour grapes because now things are selling, for a higher price than his park is, So, and as a broker, it's almost your job to try and manhandle that situation and try and prove that, we should be pricing off of 6 months ago, not 6 months from now. But as a broker, obviously, I can't afford to do that. I'm a seller's broker. I'm not a buyer's broker. Buyers, I tell every buyer I'm one of the most expensive brokers in the industry. It is what it is. But when the tables turn and you're ready to sell, it's going to be a very good position for you, because I'm going to be able to help you get that maximized value.
That's awesome, Glenn. How can our listeners get a hold of you if they'd like to do so?
Sure, it's very easy. You can go to my website. It's themhpexpert.com. And on there, you can see our contact info. You can see all my deals and things like that. And here's some of our, story and stuff like that. All of our blogs are on there as well. You can always just reach out to me directly. My cell phone's 423-483-0492. And I pick up the phone every time it rings. And if I don't answer, it means I'm calling you back, usually with, by the end of the day, but certainly within 24 hours. My whole team is trained the same way. We don't let people just hang out wondering if we got their message. So if you call us, you'll get a call back and you'll get, at least 15 minutes of our time.
Awesome, Glenn. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I want to ask one last question.
Sure.
What is one tip that you would give to a passive investor looking to get into mobile home parks?
You're not going to like it.
What comes to your mind first?
A, are you sure you want to do this? B, use your money. Don't use somebody else's money. Use your money in a bank on your first deal. Buy a small, perfect, easy peasy, well-located deal that has no brain damage on it. Just like you go to college before you go to med school, before you become a doctor, consider this your education course. Go buy the 10-unit park in the best location you can with the all lot rent and the public utilities and the public roads. And, that way you can learn the right way to do it first before you go and take on a bigger deal with other people's money and heavier value add, because that's where people screw up. And that's where things can go real sour. So buy the best located deal with your money that you can afford.
Awesome, Glenn. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. That's it for today, folks. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
Thank you, Andrew.
Would you like to see mobile home park value add projects in progress? If so, follow us on Instagram at Passive MHP Investing for photos and awesome videos from our recent mobile home park acquisitions. Once again, that's at Passive MHP Investing on Instagram. See you there.